This program is rated 14 plus and may contain mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart.
Tonight, a young Métis mother of 3 is murdered, but years go by and no arrests.
We knew it was a homicide right away based on the victim and the victim's condition.
She was murdered in her home.
She was strangled to death.
They do everything possible to never answer a question.
Their pain is forever, and it just won't, the hurt is not ever going to go away for them.
But I can't spend every minute every day anymore dealing with this. It just can't, because it's just taken too much already.
We defense counsel are here to keep the system honest, here to keep the system fair, keep the police honest, the prosecution honest.
Personally, it's heartbreaking.
Here now is Nancy Hixt with Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the story of Terry Ann Dauphinée.
On the evening of April 28, 2002, a young woman was captured on surveillance video at a Calgary grocery store at about 9:30 at night. She casually strolled the aisles, stopped to read labels, and carefully selected items to put in her shopping cart. After she paid, she left the store with her purchases. This was the last time Terry Ann Dauphinée was seen alive. The next morning, in the quiet northwest community of Citadel, Terry's sister stopped in for a visit. Instead, she stumbled upon a crime scene and immediately called police.
When the first responders arrived at the house, they found Terry Ann deceased by the front door inside the house. They also found 3 children that were locked in their rooms in the house as well. There were a lot of things in that scene that made it very suspicious, but certainly looking at the victim, it was pretty clear that the victim had been killed.
24-year-old Terry Ann Dauphinée was dead.
The autopsy later determined that the victim had been strangled, and it was pretty clear that we had a homicide.
Terry's parents vividly remember getting the call from police.
Just that she was murdered in her home, the 3 children locked up. Well, 2 of them locked up in the bedroom and baby in a car seat in the back closet.
They always have this, can't tell you this, can't tell you that, all that, even though we've come very close with a lot of these people. They're fine people and everything, and they did all they could do, but they do everything possible to never answer a question.
Tony and Sue Martin had a blended family with 6 girls. Terry was the second oldest.
When we got married, we became one family unit. They weren't his children and they weren't my children. They were our children. Terry Ann was born on February 21st, 1978, 8 pounds, 8 ounces, 24 inches long. She loved school, she aced it. She was an honor student. In fact, she graduated high school just before she turned 16 and had scholarships to go to any university here in Canada.
Her life's mission was to become a doctor, and that was all there was to it, so she dedicated herself to school. She was never really any problem. Out of all the kids, she was probably the easiest one to deal with. She never really got in trouble. She wasn't saucy as the other ones and everything. She was just pretty passive, and very easy to get along with. And we had a great relationship, Every Saturday morning, we all gathered around on the couch for cartoons and pancakes, and that's the way life began then.
When Terry was about 11 years old, the family took in a teenaged boy.
He seemed to be a nice young guy who was really headed down the wrong path. And, the families got together, we all sort of became friends and everything.
Ken Dauphinée became like a son to Tony and Sue.
Loved the guy, I just adored him. You know, he's, you know, hanging out with them, playing pool, just being with them and everything like that. You know, just he was just great to have around. I mean, I had a house full of girls. Even the dogs were girls. So it was nice to have a, you know, a guy, you know, like he was just like a son.
Eventually, Ken moved out, but he stayed in touch with the Martins. And somewhere along the line, Ken and Terry fell in love.
I would say she was probably close to 16 and he was maybe 19, something like that. I wasn't happy about it at all. I had lots of serious discussions with him over that, but it was too late. There was nothing to do at that point.
Terry was very beautiful, but she didn't have that self-esteem thinking she was beautiful enough to deserve better. So when Ken paid attention to her, it was like, wow, a boy's paying attention to me.
Just that they were too young to be doing what they were doing, and you know, why didn't they take some time apart and see if this was the way they wanted to go and stuff? I mean, there's no way that you can force anybody, even in 2002.
In 1998, when Terry was about 20 years old, she married Ken Dauphiné and started a family. By the spring of 2002, they had 3 children, a 4-year-old girl, a 2-year-old son, and a baby boy. But according to Ken, the marriage was on the rocks, and he moved out. He said it was about 7 weeks later that she was found dead.
Coming up, as police try to unravel the murder, investigators question a close family member. Welcome back. After a young mother of 3 is found murdered in her own home, her family is desperate for answers. We now return to Nancy Hixt with Beyond a Reasonable Doubt.
Police converged on the quiet Northwest Calgary community of Citadel as the death of 24-year-old Terry Dauphiné was deemed a homicide.
When we took a look at the scene, which is your typical house in a nice neighborhood, there was no signs of forced entry. We did see some evidence of what may have been considered as staging. There were some things that we saw that made it look like perhaps somebody was trying to make it look like there was a forced entry, but in fact there was no forced entry. So we did see some glove marks on the window, but that window had never been entered. We saw some of those types of things around the house.
As officers continued to search for evidence, the victim's estranged husband was questioned by investigators.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Dauphiné.
Dauphiné? Oh, okay. Dauphiné. What nationality is that?
Métis.
Oh, all right.
Grandfather on my dad's side is Métis.
Oh, okay.
I did speak with a lawyer and he said not to make any statements.
Police continued their questioning.
I would really like to know what happened, because I don't see that. I don't see it as Ken purposely went over there for something to happen. I think this is something that wasn't meant to happen. You didn't mean to hurt her.
I don't even know what happened so far.
Well,
all I've been told is I have been arrested for the homicide of my wife.
okay,
Period.
yeah. And you were the last person I understand that was in the house. And that's why we're trying to piece things together.
In talking to the estranged husband, what we determined from from what he said in the interview is that he had been trying to get back together. The couple had been trying to get back together. They had been estranged though for a period of time, but he did talk about being in the house and being with Terry Ann during their time apart.
Yeah. We've been going to counseling and we've been trying to work it out, and the only reason I wasn't living at the house was because we had an argument that had gotten physical, and she was grabbing and hitting, and I twisted her arm and she phoned the police, and I moved out that day.
Okay. But it got to the point you said she was physical against you?
Mm-hmm.
To start with, what sort of things happened there?
She was hitting me. I mean, when we were talking and whatnot, she was pushing buttons and she started hitting and pushing, and when I went to go past her, she grabbed my shirt and yanked on the collar and ripped my shirt, and that was when it was pulled, I believe, on this side over here, so it was hurting me over here, and I just turned around and I grabbed her arm from grabbing me, and I twisted her arm, and that was when she phoned the police that night.
Dauphiné said he spent time with Terry just hours before she was found dead.
Terry had called because she hadn't had a chance to go get groceries, so I went back at about 9 o'clock last night, and I stayed with the kids in the house while she went and got groceries. She took about an hour, and she came back and we talked in the afternoon when I was there. We had put the kids out for a nap, and we're talking and getting close, and we had gotten intimate.
Okay.
And then that evening when I came back, when she got back from grocery shopping, we were talking and whatnot. She'd actually asked me to spend the night, and I just didn't think that was a good idea because we were talking about me moving back already, but it was still a little ways off. We had some counseling to go through, and so I just thought it was probably not a good idea for me to spend the night. But as we were talking and whatnot that evening, we were intimate again, and then I told her that I really should go because it's going to be confusing for the kids. So I left about 11:30.
Okay, it's about 11:30 last night.
Yep.
All right. So things sounds like things were starting to get better between you.
Much.
Police pressed for answers and suggested Dauphiné was responsible for Terry's death.
And I think it is one of those things where the buttons were pushed and things happen so quick, and if we could only turn back the clock, if we could only move that clock back a few minutes, a few moments, and say if I hadn't have done this, I hadn't have done that, things would be different.
So I guess I have to assume that
I do. I really,
suspect.
I really do. I do, Ken. And I think you realize that too.
The fact that there was no signs of forced entry, so it was somebody that obviously or would appear had access, free access to the residence, as well as some of the interviews that were done and looking at the history of the family. It certainly led us to look at the estranged husband very seriously.
And it's important to talk about what happened between you and Terry. But something did.
I just explained everything that happened between Terry and I last night.
Okay.
And so now I will take the advice of the legal counsel to exercise my right to silence, because I feel that I'm being steered down a path that I
Not
don't
being
need
steered
to.
anywhere, Ken. We're talking truths here. You talked about your relationship.
We're
You
talking
talked about
speculation, because that's what you told me earlier.
We're talking because I don't know. Because I wasn't there. You know who was there?
Truths, though.
Do you know who was there, Ken?
I have
You were
no
there.
idea.
You were there and Terry was there. You know that.
I was there at 11:30.
You're scared.
I don't know what happened.
What do you
And
think
I can
happened?
do
Yeah.
whatever happened, but I'm not willing to talk about what happened either. I'm going to exercise the right to silence as per the legal counsel that I received.
I can say that there was no doubt within the homicide unit that this was our suspect and it was the only person that we were looking at that time. It doesn't exclude that there may be other people involved, but there's no doubt that this was the individual in our minds that was responsible. When talking to the Crown Prosecutor's Office at the time, they didn't feel that there was enough evidence to charge anybody, even though we had a suspect, which was the estranged husband. So we released him without charge.
In the weeks that followed, Global News reached out to Ken Dauphiné for comment.
No, they haven't told me anything. I have no information about the situation. I have no knowledge, and I have nothing further to say.
He was just really an ordinary guy. He had worked for the city of Calgary as a laborer. He carried on that type of work. So he really was just an ordinary Joe. And that's how life went along for him.
Well, back in 2002, the husband was absolutely the suspect. The problem is there is just not enough evidence to charge him.
What kind of forensic evidence was there?
Well, the fact is he was a member of the family, even though he was estranged. So it wouldn't be surprising that his fingerprints would be there. The accused admitted freely that the two recently had sexual relations, and therefore the fact that there would be semen would not be surprising either. So forensic evidence in this case could not really assist us.
Coming up, as the key suspect in the homicide is released, police go to extraordinary lengths to push the case forward. Welcome back. As investigative leads dry up, years later, police initiate an undercover sting operation. We now return to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the story of Terry Ann Dauphiné.
As 2002 came to an end, there were no charges laid in the homicide of Terry Dauphiné, and it weighed on her family.
For 4 years, I couldn't deal with the police or news media or anything like that because I was fighting for my life. Three years after she was murdered, I wanted to end my life. I couldn't take that pain no more.
Please don't go. I miss you so, baby.
Sue Martin sought healing through her community. She held vigils and raised awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women, including Terry.
I'm tired of going through detectives. I'm tired of, and I'm not saying all police officers are that way, but not a call in 2 years. Nothing. Not from the news media, nothing.
Terry's father also did all he could to keep her case in the public eye.
Once the case goes cold, if you don't have people such as yourself and other people that are kind enough to bring it back to light, it just goes in a box. That's the end of it. In this world we live in, unfortunately, there's always a new one, and they can't spend time on it.
Years went by, and the investigation appeared to stall.
It is a balancing act with loved ones, because the reality is we have holdback evidence, or we have evidence that we're going to need to prosecute if it gets to court. And even if that means it gets to court 16, 17, 20 years later, we still have to protect it. And yet, what do the families want? They want answers. And we have some of those answers, but we can't share them all with the family. And you know, I'll give the family credits. They trusted us with that information. They trusted that we did not forget about Terry Ann, that we continued to work that case, even if we couldn't tell them everything we did.
As the years passed, Calgary police hadn't given up trying to find Terry's killer.
I think that's our job as homicide investigators, is to get that closure, get the answers for the family, and work hard to get some type of closure for them. That's paramount for us. I can tell you that there's nobody, none of the primary investigators before me or since me ever gave up on the file.
In January 2018, nearly 16 years after Terry Dauphiné was murdered, her husband and children were living in Winnipeg.
He had custody of all the kids, and with the insurance money he got from Terry Ann's passing away. He had bought a house in Winnipeg, and I believe he had various jobs.
That's when Ken Dauphiné became the target of an undercover Calgary police sting. It's a tactic police often use, known as a Mr. Big operation, where an undercover officer plays the role of a criminal kingpin, or a so-called Mr. Big.
Basically, it was an organization that was involved in trucking, but that they had a couple of side businesses involved with illegal gun trading and the sale of forged passports. The undercover members befriended Mr. Dauphiné, and in the course of befriending him, they offered him a job and took him out for some meals.
The very first meeting between Mr. Dauphiné and the other undercover officer was relatively innocuous. It involved a small amount of cash for something or other. It was quite small, but there was also a sort of a friendship component to it where the officer was befriending Mr. Dauphiné, and not only did they bring him in to work sort of in their gang doing some of this illegal activity, but it also gave him a social life, some fellas to hang out with, people he could talk to.
After months of building trust, the sting, dubbed Operation Homefront, intensified. At one point, uniformed police showed up at the Dauphiné home in Winnipeg.
Police involved Mr. Dauphiné's teenage children by going to the house, going to Mr. Dauphiné's house where these teenagers were by themselves, and suggesting to them that they were going to be, that their father was going to be arrested for the murder of the mother, and then just sort of walking out and leaving it like that. And their hope was that these teenagers would contact Mr. Dauphiné, and that would add pressure to Mr. Dauphiné. In the presence of this undercover officer, he received a phone call from a homicide detective, again all set up, saying, listen, we're going to bring you in on the murder of your wife.
That's when Dauphiné met the perceived leader of the network, Mr. Big.
Mr. Big sort of lays it out that he's quite impressed with the work that Mr. Dauphiné's doing. The boys are really happy with him. They'd like to include him in what they're doing going forward, give him more responsibilities. That'll come with more pay. But there's this trouble that I've heard about. And in order for me to help you, Mr. Big says to him, like, I need to know the details because I have connections with police, with judges, with prosecutors, but I need detail so that we can make sure we get you out of this, or we can move you someplace where they'll never catch up with you.
The identity of the undercover officer who plays the role of Mr. Big is protected by a court-imposed publication ban. In that meeting, Dauphiné tells the officer there is no evidence for homicide detectives to find.
I keep telling you that I know there's nothing.
How do you know that?
Because there isn't anything. Nothing. Like, I've had numerous fires afterwards to make sure all of my paperwork was done. I don't know. I got super carried.
With the advancements in forensics. Anything? Like the clothes you wear at the time?
Nope.
Where they found them?
Ashes? No.
Okay. So you burnt that?
Yeah.
Good. Soon after?
Yeah.
Very nice. Did anyone see the fire? Like, was it like a fireplace or was it a fireplace? Okay.
Mr. Big pressed Dauphiné for more information.
I know it's hard to talk about, right?
Well, you know, I can only talk about so much. And I hope you can appreciate that. I'm not going to lay out a confession for you. It's just bullshit all over again. That's nothing then. If she knows nothing, I didn't pick up a weapon. So now I can rest more easy. But yeah, no, that's, yeah, I don't know. They didn't find a weapon. There was no weapon. There was no weapon in the car. There was no... Yeah, that's smoke and mirrors now. And like there was never ever any mention of a weapon before. I don't think the reports even mentioned there being a weapon used. No. There was no weapon, so...
So you have zero recollection that you had anything to do with Terry's murder?
Correct. Except that I feel that it's all my fault.
Why do you feel it's your fault?
Because I'm the head of the house.
Mr. Dauphiné never made a full confession to Mr. Big, and everything that was spoken would be, inferences would have to be drawn from it.
After the break, police turn up the heat on the undercover sting operation. Welcome back. The Mr. Big sting operation leads to a break in the case. We now return to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the story of Terry Ann Dauphiné.
As Operation Homefront continued in May of 2018, Ken Dauphiné had already met with Mr. Big, and days later had another videotaped meeting with an undercover police officer.
So his friend, the undercover officer, is then saying to him, okay, look, we can't let you get arrested. We're gonna move, we're gonna hide you. And they're going from hotel to hotel, here, there, and everywhere on a daily basis over 4 days, trying to keep him away, supposedly, from the Calgary police who want to come and get him for the murder.
Okay. I mean, there was precautions so that there wasn't DNA.
Like what? You were wearing gloves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and that stuff's all gotten destroyed too. So that's why I keep saying there's nothing left. And it's even the little bits that I can remember. I'm feeling really terrible, and it's extra stressful because I've been so vehemently maintaining this other story for family, friends, and everybody. That's everybody. And whatever, going through this fight all over again. Going through the whole drama of turning myself in, having a lawyer show them that this is bullshit, that they're making stuff up, and having it be tossed out would be marvelous and worth it. I think when we were starting, I went downstairs to get some space because I was in the leave, and she said, don't leave. I'm just speculating now because I know I went into the basement. And that's where the clubs were. I think it was because I was leaving. And she didn't want me to leave. Yeah. So it was a big no. Yeah. Push. No. I'll go this way. No. No. Everywhere I turned, she was stepping in the way. No. No. And I think I just grabbed her and tossed her away. She went down funny. And that was like panic mode. So, and extra panic mode.
The day after he made that statement to undercover police, on May 21st, 2018, Ken Dauphiné was arrested.
It's those little pieces of information that the public has that finally comes forward. And once we receive that, it often pushes the file into a great place. And that's what happened here.
After waiting nearly 2 decades for an arrest in the murder of their daughter, the parents of Terry-Ann Dauphinee are speaking out for the first time. Nancy, this is a huge development for these parents.
Linda, Terry Dauphinee's parents have committed their lives to making sure someone would be held accountable for her death. So getting the call from Calgary Police this week was huge for them.
And I said, is this the call I've been waiting 16 years and 22 days for? And she goes, well, sit down. Yes, it is. So naturally, you know, I almost fell over. It was an unbelievable feeling after all that time.
No, I really didn't think anything was going to happen. But thankfully, Terry had warriors on this case that never ever gave up, that took this case to heart. And they do every case, but it haunted them.
The trial was scheduled for 2021.
The Crown's theory was that at some point on the evening in question, Kenneth Dauphinee got angry and put the children in the bedrooms and strangled Terry-Ann and left her dead just outside the front door of the home.
But before the trial could begin, a voir dire was held to determine if key evidence would be allowed.
Well, the Mr. Big operation is what's called presumptively inadmissible. So the onus is on the Crown to establish that the evidence gleaned from the Mr. Big operation is that its probative value outweighs its prejudicial effect. So that means that the evidence has to be very strong, pointing towards guilt, and it must outweigh any bad character evidence that might come into play or any things that would conflict with society's sense of fair play. So, for example, if the police were abusive or the tricks or falsehoods went too far. And so the court looks at the length of time that the operation went on. The hardest thing that he said in terms of evidence against him was that he grabbed her and that he knocked her out of the way and that she fell down funny. He then went to panic mode and he left. So although that certainly implicates him, it's not the strongest confession by any means.
Our position is that this evidence was not admissible primarily because it was unreliable, that there wasn't any corroboration support for the things that Mr. Dauphinee was saying to the undercover police officers. And so it really could have been the result of just the inducements, him wanting to stay involved with these undercovers and their gang.
Defense also argued the Mr. Big operation crossed the line.
There are strict rules on this so that the police don't take liberties with citizens. You don't get to pressure people unfairly. And that was one of the problems for the police in Mr. Dauphinee's case, that they had pressured him so that there was actually physical changes to him, personality changes over 4 days where they had him on the run, and they had involved his teenagers, in suggesting to the teenagers that their father was going to be charged with killing their mother in the hope that the teenagers would tell their dad this, and that may prompt soften him up in his communications with Mr. Big, what he said to Mr. Big.
There was another key piece of evidence the Crown sought to have entered: videotaped witness statements provided to investigators 16 years earlier. That witness was a 4-year-old child.
Well, it's very difficult when you have a witness that young. Obviously the biggest issue is you don't want to lead the child into saying anything or implanting anything with the child so that they say something that isn't true. So police officers are trained to interview children very carefully with open-ended questions, so that what comes out is coming from the child and not from the interviewer. You have to appreciate that standards have changed over the years, and in the interviews done in 2002 could have been better.
The name of this witness is protected under a court-imposed publication ban.
You know, this girl, the 4-year-old, was at one point talking about the Cookie Monster having been there, and the Cookie Monster having had a flashlight or something like that. And the police were surmising that the Cookie Monster was supposed to be her father, and that this flashlight was in fact, you know, like a stun gun that was used. And none of that was ever supported medically, that there had been a stun gun. And the business of the Cookie Monster was never clear that that was indeed her father, because she would know her father and wouldn't need to call him the Cookie Monster. So it was a confusing part of the evidence that seemed to lack any real basis in reality.
The videotaped interview was played in court.
During the trial, the evidentiary hearing, that videotape was played for the court and for the girl herself, who was now older, so that she could watch, listen, and see the things that she had said. So when the trial came along and the prosecution called the daughter, so many years later, it was clear that she had a good relationship with her father. He had raised her, and that she clearly was supportive of him. Her testimony was basically, I have no memory of what happened when I was 4, no memory in the house. I may have flashes of things, but I can't tell you that they're legitimate and that they're really tied to that night. And I hear myself or see myself in this video that the police took of her 4-year-old making the statement, of herself as a 4-year-old making the statement. She says, I hear what I say, but I have no recollection today whether that's true, untrue. I can't substantiate it.
After the break, would the prosecution's key evidence be allowed in the trial? Stay tuned for the conclusion of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Welcome back. Nearly 2 decades after her murder, would there be justice for Terry Ann? Here's Nancy Hicks with the conclusion of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the story of Terry Ann Dauphiné.
Nearly 2 decades after Terry Dauphiné was killed, it was now up to Court of Queen's Bench Justice Rosemary Nation to decide if the Crown's key evidence would be admissible in the trial.
The judge ruled most of the statements of the 4-year-old inadmissible, and also ruled that the Mr. Big operation was inadmissible.
In her decision regarding the Mr. Big operation, Justice Nation noted Dauphiné never gave much detail, nor did he describe what happened on the evening of Terry Ann's death, other than a few fragments of memory. She added, the totality of the interrogations led to confusing and contradictory answers, against a background of the accused constantly reaffirming that he has no or limited recollection of events.
She set everything out fairly, and then was actually critical of the police for the tactics they had used in this one, for them involving the teenagers at Mr. Dauphiné's home, with no one being there and telling them dad was going to be charged with killing their mother, and just sort of leaving them on their own to sort that through, however emotionally, physically it took a toll on the children. She was, highly critical of that, as she should have been.
The judge in her reasons for decision made comments about the police and basically saying that they went too far in this case, and I know that the police feel strongly otherwise, and I respectfully disagree with some of what the judge said about police conduct. The problem is that is a finding of fact, and the Crown is not allowed to appeal findings of fact. We can only appeal on the basis of errors of law. So even though I may respectfully disagree with the judge, it's not an appealable ground.
With the key evidence in the case now ruled inadmissible, the prosecution decided to stay the proceedings. That essentially halts the court process. Police had up to 1 year to continue the investigation and revive the charge against Ken Dauphinais. A year passed. The case did not proceed against Dauphinais.
So if the police all of a sudden got new evidence today, what would happen?
Nothing. Because to charge him again would be double jeopardy. That's a violation of our charter. The system is designed that it's better that that 100 guilty people go free than one person who's not guilty be convicted. And we've had cases of wrongful convictions in this country. We don't want to repeat that again. Although I disagree with some of the judge's findings, I respect her decision.
Some people who don't understand the justice system have trouble with it. They think, well, if it wasn't Mr. Dauphinais, he's not guilty, then someone else had to do it. But if there is no somebody else, then it had to be Mr. Dauphinais and he should have been found guilty. But that's not how the system works. The system works this way. If someone is charged with an offense, the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person did it.
And I respect the legal system, and it is a legal system. It just personally is heartbreaking that I feel that we weren't able to give that closure to the family as we set out to when we found Terry-Ann deceased. After the fact, just earlier this year, we did sit with the family and we spent an entire day with Terry-Ann's mom and dad and went through all of the work that had gone on over the last 20 years, including from the primary investigator and the forensic and the patrol officers that responded, right up through even after charge and all of the work that went on post-charge. And that was the first time that they had heard a lot of the effort and work that we had done. From my perspective, I'm super proud of all the work that went on. And frankly, I think the community would be proud if they could hear all of the work that went on to get answers for Terry-Ann's family.
Terry's family said they've lost hope there will be justice in her case, but remain focused on making sure she's never forgotten.
I just want her to be remembered as a really kind person who loved her kids, and she was a very devout, religious person. She just loved life. I just want her kids to understand at some point in their lives that they had a wonderful mother that they didn't get a chance to enjoy. That's what it comes down to. It's more important to me than anything.
The Calgary Police Service said it was unable to comment on the Mr. Big Sting operation or Justice Nation's decision on the case, including the criticism of police in that decision. Although they participated in this documentary, they said privacy laws and legal issues prevented them from discussing details of the case that weren't disclosed in court. That means, with no trial and no chance of future prosecution, most of the evidence gathered during the police investigation will never be made public.
I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat.
Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.